In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now I have a dream that we will implement love, not hate, or supporting another Jim Crow's agenda. CRT is not an honest dialogue. It is a tactic that was used by Hitler and the Ku Klux Klan on slavery very many years ago to dumb down my ancestors, so we could not think for ourselves. CRT is racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color. Let me educate you. An honest dialogue does not oppress. An honest dialogue does not implement hatred or injustice. It's to communicate without deceiving people. Today, we don't need your agreement. We want action and a backbone for what we asked for today, to ban CRT. We don't want your political advertisement to divide our children or belittle them. Think twice before you indoctrinate such racist theories. You cannot tell me what is or is not racist. Look at me. I had to come down here today to tell you to your face that we are coming together and we are strong. This will not be the last. Greet and meet respectfully.
Vi. We have a little bit of a lot of stuff going on here in North Carolina, and I was just getting my material set together here. It's kind of maybe an old story, but there's a lot of people who are pretty jacked up. Not on one side, but on the other side, they're pretty happy that we have a couple of bills in North Carolina right now. Although I might be throwing some cold water on that, just because we don't know for sure what's going to happen. But I wanted to go through some of that, and that's where we're going to end. So hopefully this will be a little bit of a quick video this time. And also, since this is episode 6, hopefully we can start doing this a little bit more regularly. I've been pretty caught up with some other things, and so haven't done much on the video side for the education site here in North Carolina. Want to say, though, that lady that we just saw, who we introed the show with, is a fabulous hero, and she deserves an award. We're going to be talking about critical race theory, which we already did in one episode discussing what it was. And North Carolina is, in fact, trying to do something to combat it. Will it be successful? I want to note, though, first, before we start this, some things that people should be aware of that are happening outside the state in other states, but nevertheless it seems to be happening all over. This is by Andrea Widberg, and this is, of course, the American Thinker, a pretty decent website. March 17th, a little bit dated. It's almost a month old now, but public school teachers plotted to destroy parents. And basically this is happening in Loudoun County, Virginia. By the way, where that lady that we began the show with this episode is from, and she was addressing Loudoun County school board there. But also, critical race theory. This is a little quote here from Dennis Prager, who is, if you don't know who he is, he's a radio talk show host. I would call him probably the closest thing to a political philosopher on radio, and that was even before Rush Limbaugh passed away. But he says here that if I can let me get my mouse up here. The worst news is that sending your child to almost any elementary school or high school, public or private, is fast becoming equally toxic. More and more schools are being taken over by left-wing ideologues and by non-ideologues who lack the courage. If you follow Barry Weiss's Substack, by the way, she posted 2 letters from a couple of parents. Actually, I think one was a parent and one was a teacher. These are private schools, and the critical race theory is running so headlong in some of these upper middle class to upper class private high schools that the parents are revolting in a way, and those who want to revolt are afraid to. This is not a good way to run a society based on freedom. From Instapundit, again, this is April 30th, so it's about 2 weeks old. But once again, I think we're talking about Loudoun County, aren't we? Let me see here. If we go down here, no, this is in Missouri. Faced with complaints from parents about indoctrination of children. An official in Rockwood School District, Missouri, instructed teachers to create 2 sets of curriculums, a false one to share with parents and a real one, basically. Natalie Fallert, Ed D, 612 Literacy Speech Coordinator, wrote to all middle and high school officials, middle and high school principals, that parents had repeatedly claimed that we are pushing an agenda. We are pushing critical race theory. We are making white kids feel bad about their privilege. We are stereotyping, et cetera, et cetera. Her solution was that doesn't mean to throw out the whole lesson. Just find new ones. Pull the resource off Canvas. That is a learning management system, Canvas is. So basically, if your student goes online, what you're going to see is what they want you to see, but they'll have the real stuff embedded in it. So that's what this school district is doing to fool parents of what they're teaching. So this hidden agenda is pretty prevalent. Larry Sand at American Greatness, where I have written and have a few things up there if you're interested. April 6th sort of addresses some of the reaction to this and related to the COVID lockdowns that we talked about in the first episode or two. But he said the Wall Street Journal notes the 50 school choice bills have been introduced in 30 states this year. Kentucky voted in the tax credit funded education savings account. Lindsay Burke of Heritage Foundation and Education Policy explains that students from families with incomes below 175% of the federal poverty line will access education savings accounts. The program is available to students living in counties more than 90,000 residents. And the reason why I wanted to bring this story in by Larry Sand is because in North Carolina here, as you can see, as I highlight the whole thing here, House Bill 32, working its way through the legislative process, the Equal in Opportunity Act will increase funding for existing voucher programs and allow more students to apply for scholarships. Now, these voucher programs are important because what they do is they allow parents, if they choose to send their student to a different school, they can use that money in part to offset. Now, the theory behind all of this is that you pay taxes into your school district. If your school district's not teaching your student, why should they keep the money from that student? Therefore, you should take some, I don't even think it's 100%, but you should take some of that money, a preponderant majority of that money, and use it to go to a school of your choice. So if this is true, here's House Bill 32. And I want to note, not necessarily the text of it, although I believe down here, here's the Opportunity and Grant Scholarship Fund that I'm highlighting right now. And the scholarship grant eligibility here is in section 1.3A. But the point that I'm going to make with this, as I'm going to make with House Bill 324, which is the important one here on critical race theory, is this. Now, you'll notice here that it starts in the House. It's filed, or at least it's filed in the House, and now it's off into the Senate. We don't have any action as of right now in the Senate, but I want to note here that the votes. So the total votes are 118. The ayes are 69, and the noes are 49. In North Carolina, the House, the General Assembly, has 120 members in it. The Senate side has 50. Now, I want you to keep those numbers in mind because they're going to be important here going forward. And by going forward, I mean that I'm going to probably throw a little bit of cold water on some things here, but that's because I'm naturally pessimistic about these things. However, that said, all of these things are good in terms of it's better to have at least a bill before you, so voters can understand and know what's going on and have something to vote on and vote. You might say have an informed vote than not. So the reason I want to pull up the votes on this one, this is 32, this is on the vouchers or the scholarships. This is the Equity and Opportunity Act, as you can see up here at top. Ayes, Republican. All Republicans voted yes. All Republicans voted for parents to have money to send their own money, really, to send their kids to a different school, should they choose to. They don't have to, but should they choose to. Now, you'll notice here that no Republicans dissented. On the Democrat side, ayes, zippo. There's not one Democrat in this state that voted for this. Not one. I think that's important. Now, getting to some people are really excited about this. Some people are really, as I said, jacked about this. That is not happy about this. So some are pumped, some are jacked, and this bill, which is you can imagine most of the people in the state and the legacy media, the places that the media the media organs that, to be honest with you, no one really reads, the Raleigh News and Observer, Charlotte Observer, WRAL, Yawn. They're very much against this sort of stuff. But as you can see here, I just want you to see that the text of the bill, it looks pretty good, actually. It's a finely written bill in a way. For the purposes, I want to highlight here that for the purposes of this section, promote shall mean any of the following: compelling students, teachers, and administrators or other school employees to affirm or profess a belief in concepts described here, including concepts described in the subsection C of this section, curricula reading lists, seminars, workshops, trainings, or other educational or professional settings. Now, public schools then shall not, here it's C, promote the following concepts. Shall not: one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. That's critical race theory right there. They believe that some people are superior to others based on the color of your skin. An individual solely by virtue of his or her race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Once again, critical race theory. An individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his race or sex. Critical race theory. An individual moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex. Critical race theory. So we could continue to go on here. An individual, by virtue of his race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. Critical race theory. Any individual solely by virtue of his or her race or sex should feel discomfort, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress. That's critical race theory too. They want you to feel that way. They want you to go through a struggle session, essentially. And this is real, like they do in socialist and communist countries, and make you admit something that you're not responsible for, or that you didn't do, or that you can't help. Like, for example, the color of your skin, the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, whatever. They don't care. They want a certain race or group of people, a certain identity of people, to feel bad, to be blamed for something. Now, I can tell you we fought a civil war on this topic, but they don't believe, actually, that the war was, solved anything. Slavery is still here, so to speak. So this idea, for example, of white supremacy is complete bunk and not based in fact. I'll say a little bit more about that probably at the end of the show here, but I wanted to get through this. And then Bill, as you can tell here, if you're interested in not targeting people based on who they are, based on characteristics that they cannot help, then you should like this bill. It doesn't take anything out of history. It doesn't take any facts out of history, because what they're doing is making up stuff to teach or propagate the kids. So point 7 here then, as I just highlight, the belief in that the United States as a meritocracy is racist or sexist and has created by members of a particular race or sex to oppress members of another race or sex. Yeah, that is patently not true. And those who want to teach that, critical race theory. Nothing in this section shall be construed as prohibiting the following. Now, this is also a good part of the bill because it doesn't regulate speech protected in the First Amendment. Accessing materials on an individual basis that advocate concepts described therein. In other words, hey man, if you want to go CRT all day long, hey, feel free. Can you speak about it? Sure. Yeah, we don't care. But we're not going to teach it in our schools. That's basically it. Now, if since this is public education and the General Assembly is the arbiter over what education should be and what it should consist of because it's public, then they have every right to do this. They have every right to do this. The question is whether the rationale is a good one. And in this case, I would have to say it is, because the points 1 through 7 here that the critical race theory people want to teach, the opposite of all of this that I just read you, is in fact harming or an abusive relationship between the schools and the kids. They are singling out some for abuse. I mean, that's the emotional abuse in particular, by making them feel bad for who they are. Now, I'm going to throw some cold water on this, I suppose. We are in the Senate now here, as you can see. We are in the Rules Committee in the Senate. Senate, as I said, has 50 members. The General Assembly, the House, has 120. Now, I want you to note here, right here, this is the vote that sends it over to the Senate, since it once again originated in the House, as you can see here back in March. The pass vote is 66-48, and I want you to know, once again, just like in the last bill we looked at back here, House Bill 32, House Bill 324 on critical race theory, ayes 66, noes 48. Here's the ayes. All Republican. Not one Republican voted against it. And I think even more telling here is that there is not one Democrat that said they were against institutionalized racism of critical race theory. Every single Democrat voted no. In other words, every single Democrat voted to keep critical race theory in our schools. Every single Democrat, true to form, all the way back to 1850, decided they wanted to keep a form of raciology in our schools, and that is the fact of it. Now, what does this mean going forward? Now, a lot of people, like I said, are very happy about House Bill 324. I know a lot of people are, thank God we got something in the Senate, or excuse me, in the General Assembly, out of the House. All fine and good. I think it's very good here to note on this page who voted yes and who voted no, and you should vote accordingly, especially if you have a child in school. Although I would say for those who have children who are grown and gone, the education of our kids is going to have profound consequences in our state. If this stuff is not halted, it will be a cancer. And as you can probably already see in especially other big cities, Charlotte, Raleigh, but also Atlanta, and other D.C. and other cities, they are infected with this stuff, and what it's doing is causing unrest. Not because of, supposed former white slave owners, which, by the way, is a fallacy in some way, because not only whites own slaves, but because it's being caused by the people who are actually or promoted by the people who are actually promoting critical race theory. Now, why does this matter, this vote? Because when we get to the Senate, let's say it passes the Senate, okay? If it passes the Senate, then then it goes to the governor. Now, governor, our bright governor, whose wife actually, flips off students as she drives down the road, which she actually did. That's a true story. Will veto the bill. Then what? Well, by the Constitution of North Carolina, I want you to see here that if approved, this is Section 22, Action on Bills in the legislative section, if approved by 3/5 of the members of the House present and voting. Okay, so this is not 3/5 of the total, but I'm going to use total numbers here just to be just to make it easy, because I can't imagine people not showing up to vote on this should they attempt an override of the governor's veto. It shall become law notwithstanding the objections of the governor. So those are the parameters of setting in to place Governor Cooper's assured veto of this bill, should it pass, and what it will take to overcome it. It's going to take 3/5 of the members present. Okay, so if we go back here for just a minute here, 66, 48, this is 324, this is the anti-critical race theory bill, or the freedom bill, as I would like to call it. And there are 120 members in the House total. Now, let's say all 120 members show up. The vote to override 3/5 is 72. Okay? Now, we have 50 members in the Senate. It's got to go to the Senate. Remember, I just read to you here that it's got to be overturned by 3/5 of the members of that House presenting and voting. Okay? If it's going to the Senate, then the Senate 3/5 members shall also have to vote, and that number is 30. Now, the question is, do they have enough numbers for that? Let me see here. If after such 3/5 members of the House present voting, veto message to the other House, and it will likewise be reconsidered and if approved. So it has to be 3/5 in both the House and the Senate, to override. 66 is not 70, or 72, excuse me. So this is my only concern. While it is fabulous that the Republicans definitely passed this, and it is also true that some people were not there, as you can see here, right here. You can see down here. Some people were not here. Those 3 people show up on the Republican side as an excused absence because Zachary didn't vote, Humphrey didn't vote, Faircloth didn't vote. Then that only gets us to 69. We need 72. We need 72 votes in the House to override the veto. Now, I want to say something here which might cloud things up a little bit. But I can find my glasses. Back during the Civil Rights era, I know some people have compared this, the House Bill 342, to the Civil Rights bills. And that's fine and great, but they're problematic in a certain way. Because this is George Anastopoulos' piece from 1960. It's on the Declaration of Independence, and he says a couple of things here about the civil rights bills. This is 65. Civil rights bills in the 50s and 60s that came up. So this is before 64, but everything was based, especially considering Brown v. Board of Education was passed in 54, so about 10 years later. And the Chief Justice said in, this is going to be Dennis v. United States, which is a precursor to what we see in our modern jurisprudence at the Supreme Court in the modern age, or in the last 70 years. Nothing is more certain in modern society than the principle that there are no absolutes, that a name, a phrase, a standard has meaning only when associated with the considerations which gave birth to the nomenclature. To those who would paralyze our government in the face of impending threat by encasing it in semantic straitjacket, we must reply that all concepts are relative. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Because what happened was, if you see here, this is from Angelo Codevilla. This is at American Greatness. And he states something in the context of what's happening in the present situation of identitarian politics, that, especially in Brown v. Board of Education, that the civil rights legislation was identitarian to begin with. In other words, we didn't follow, say, just the 14th Amendment. He suggests here that the 14th Amendment's equal protection of the laws would have been enough if they would have been enforced, meaning that the laws applied equally, going back to post-Plessy, or Harlan's dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, as you see here, would have been enough to overturn. But what happened was they forced choices on the people based on their identity. Now, Codavilla's academic point is essentially this, that identitarianism has its roots in the civil rights movement going all the way back. Now, we couldn't have possibly known that critical race theory would have, in fact, expanded the list of those things approved and unapproved. But if we would have just simply enforced the political soul of the nation and the Declaration of Independence, and in that sense, the 14th Amendment, we would not be here today. This is why you have, for example, the Civil Rights Act, and especially Title II being reformed, new things being added to the list. Part of the reason why we're having these critical race theory debates is because the list of the groups that began in the Civil Rights era is ever expanding. When you start with an identitarian mindset, it follows to the next approved government group. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily all true, but it is something to think about. That the reason why we're here is because we immediately in the 60s started dividing people up into these small groups. So the entirety of our modern critical, our constitutional reform or civil rights reform, legislative and legal decisions enforce the idea of relativity and identitarianism. The acts and legal decisions fly in the face of man's natural equality. Critical race theory is in fact a servile ideology. It's devoid of facts and history, replacing reason with passionate desire for the dominion of man over man. We saw that in the bill, House Bill 324. Everything that it prohibits to be taught is, if taught, in a teaching of dominion of man over man. One day we'll do a show, or at least I want to do a show, on the fact that there were, in fact, wealthy black slaveholders in this country. It's forgotten. It's not even talked about. I wonder if it's even taught in our schools. Probably not. In the meantime, despite all this, pray for House Bill 324 to succeed. Pray that if it's vetoed, that for one thing, parents will get relief for their children should they choose to remain in district schools. But the one thing that you can do to definitely get out of this problem and this anxiety and the possibility that your kids are going to be taught critical race theory is to walk away from district schools. Hang loose.